Hi, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Jeff, it's brilliant to have you here with that music background that you've got. So why don't you introduce yourself to start with?
Sure. Thank you so much, Alan, for having me. I really appreciate this. This is going to be great. So my name is Jeff. I'm from Oklahoma. I am a psychologist and a creativity expert. My research is really founded in music experience. I did a qualitative phenomenological study on music experience for professional musicians, and my work is really centered around exploring the different ways that music is impacting us, impacting our experience. As we navigate this life journey. And so my work is really about that, using music as a way to help people fine tune and tap in with their emotions and bring things to the surface and then help process that which emerges. So that's in a nutshell a little bit of the work that I do. But yeah, all things music and psychology, whether it's research or even in practical sense, I'm all for it. So yeah.
And so what came first, music or psychology?
So music. I was actually born into a musical family. So the very night that I was born, my mom went into labor at my dad's concert.
Oh,
So yeah, so there's this whole story about, how that experience was, and she's, trying to get my dad's attention, flagging him down, and he's just playing, and the band is like really in a heightened state of like peak performance, right? And so she gets his attention. She's like, "We gotta go, the baby's coming." And he's like, "Right now?" She's like, "Right now." And he's like, "Well, can we do one more song?" And she's like, "No, the baby's coming," right? And so that really was my, even I mentioned this in my doctoral defense meeting that this was my first phenomenological experience with music, right? Being born literally the night of my dad's concert, right? And so since then, I've been on this journey. I recorded at 5 years old and sing and learn to play drums and guitar, and then recorded again at 13 and again at 18. And so even now I'm still, music is very much a part of my identity and who I am. And then even our family, it's always been amid us. So yeah.
so when people are asked about the work they do, and the question is, when did you know you wanted to do this? You can say from the day I was born, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And what's funny is my mom would say, it just felt like the harder the music would play, the harder you would kick. So it's like, okay, now as a psychologist, it's like, man, we could really unpack that, like the conversation being had between the baby in the womb and the
Yeah.
environment, right? The musical environment. And then, then look at my life. Like I played music, my dad's recorded, my grandfather, both grandparents, like on both sides. Like it's everywhere, right? So yeah, I really think that there's a connection.
Oh, brilliant. And I don't know if you can tell, but I'm going green with envy because I love music, but I haven't got a musical bone in my body. So I'm like
Oh
totally
wow.
in awe of anybody that has anything to do with music.
Oh wow. But no, that's great. So I didn't realize that. I didn't know that you weren't a musician. I just assumed that, because you have such love for it. And with Values Jam, like maybe you're a jammer, man, you're a
Yeah,
drummer or,
I
just a
wanna
musician.
be.
There you go. That's all right. That's all right because lovers of music, the audience, there's always that musician audience connection that can't be ignored, either. So it's cool,
That's
man.
very
You
kind
got
of
music in
you.
the heart.
Yeah. Right, let's get going. Let's choose a
Okay.
card from the deck. So, how many times would you like me to cut the deck?
Cut it twice.
Cut it twice. So, I'm going to have three piles in front of me. And which
Okay.
pile? One, two, or three?
Let's do two.
Okay. And so now we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So a number between 1 and 12.
Let's go with five.
5. Okay.
Liability.
Reliability. So the first question, Jeff, is this. What does reliability mean to you? What does it look, feel, and sound like?
Wow. Look, feel, and sound like. Well, so first thing as a researcher, reliability is super important because the method that you're using has to be reliable, right? And reliable in the sense that it measures what it's intended to measure. So that's the first thing that pops up. when I think about reliability. But what does it look like? Is that the question? The first one, what does it look?
Yeah, so think of it in two halves. First, there's the kind of rational thought around what is reliability. But then when we've been through that, it would be good to explore the metaphor piece, which is the more creative thinking around what reliability looks, feels, sounds like.
Yeah. Okay, so in a practical sense, reliability looks like being able to pick up the phone and phone a friend, right? And have them be there, right? That's the first image that comes up for me. What does it feel like? I want to say it feels like the feeling that you have when you're supported, right? If you're supported through something, I don't know, and then sound like I don't know what that's really good. I don't know what reliability would sound like. I'm gonna leave that one open.
Let me start with where you finished then. So reliability to me sounds like either a single continuous note or
Okay.
or maybe a beat, actually, like a heartbeat. So you
Oh,
kind of that it's going to beat the next time, kind of thing.
oh, well, yeah,
And I was, when we were talking earlier about the baby in the womb, I would think that the baby can hear the heartbeat maybe and would feel a sense of support and comfort and safety as a
yeah,
result of that. I don't know. What does
mm,
it look like? I think the image that comes to mind for me is actually an older person. I'm not sure if it's a relative. It might be a relative, but somebody who's always there for you when you need them, and that is coming through.
yeah,
And feel like I agree with what you said about supported. I also think reliable feels kind of safe. So that's a little bit more than supported, isn't it? It feels really positive because whatever happens, that's going to be there for you.
yeah,
So it removes a lot of uncertainty, actually.
yeah. I can see that.
Yeah. Reliable is kind of, it's a heavy burden at the same time, I'm thinking, actually, because if somebody relies on you,
Yeah,
you've got to be there. And
yeah,
so, what happens if something else happens, which means that either that's a challenge or not possible? And what
yeah,
happens if you're not reliable when somebody has expected you to be?
yeah. Wow. Yeah, there's the becomes the breakdown or the opposite of feeling supported and feeling safe, right? It would be a feeling of unsafety and uncertainty. And I like what you said about what does it sound like, because you said a drummer. I mean, that for me, I 100% agree with that. Like the drum beat, like being a musician, you have to have a reliable drummer. Like that's a requirement. You have before we can tap into this experience, even a jam, the drummer is generally the center, the heartbeat of the direction and the tempo of where this thing might go, right? So if that breaks down, then the drummer is unreliable. You know what I mean? And so even in a professional musician sense, reliability is the accountability and reliability like go hand in hand. And so yeah, I think the drummer, it sounds like a drummer who's locked in. That's what reliability sounds like,
I
definitely.
think that's a great spot because you know more about this than I do, but it seems to me that in a band, exactly like you say, the drummer provides that stability, and then on top of that, like the vocalist, the guitarist, the other people, can kind of do a bit like what they want to, but they've still got that foundation of the drummer behind them, kind of holding it together. There's probably a
Right.
better way to put that in musical terms.
Right, right. Yeah. So what you basically said is, yeah, the drummer establishes that foundation that it's called the pocket, right? And so even this is my research work is around pocket experience and establishing the pocket is subtle, yet it's foundational for the completion of a static experience, right? So to be fully appreciated in its beauty, even we're talking music, right? That song has to have a foundation of stability for you to be able to go to and enjoy the guitar solo, right? It opens up that or creates a lane for a musician or a singer to improv in the appropriate, places, right? And it just compounds and it really just becomes this big, juicy sandwich of deliciousness, right? That is music, right? And it's got all of the special sauce and everything is there. But again, that foundation yeah, to have a reliable foundation is with the drummer, it's super important.
And is that evident in jazz, for instance, where when you're listening to jazz, sometimes you hear a riff or a particular part of the song, and then it goes off in a different direction. But then after a couple of minutes, maybe it comes back to what you heard a few minutes before. And so you're constantly being brought to this, yeah, reliability actually, at the same time
Yeah,
as enjoying the adventure in between times.
yeah. It's super important with jazz. So much so that jazz doesn't move without it, right? If it doesn't move together, then those movements don't really work well, and it starts to break down and becomes a bit chaotic, right? And so those beautiful colors that you see when the whole band goes up and then goes down and then goes, you know what I mean, left and a little bit right and then loud and then like that only works when there's this, a unison energy, right? That synchronicity between the band. But, you could still make that argument that it begins in the rhythm section with the drummer who can, sort of be the glue and attach all the other parts to himself.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try another question, which is we'll actually go to the other side of the coin now. So where have you noticed unreliability?
Unreliability. So that sounds like a bit of a personal question, right? It's like so the first thing I think about, okay, where throughout my life, where like what areas have I been unreliable in, right? And so I'm trying to think through that unreliability. I don't have a good example, um, but just an example of unreliable. I guess we could say the weather, right? Oh, I live in Oklahoma. And so the weather is super unreliable. We have really harsh colds and really harsh, summers. And then now, right now, well, this morning, for example, this morning it was like 38, but then it's going to get to almost 70 today. So it's a bit unreliable and then it's going to drop back down. We could have rain, we could have snow tomorrow. You just never really know. So that's the first image that comes up for me with regard to reliability, the weather here.
And just straight off, you've made me wonder about the strength and weakness of reliability, actually, because in your situation where you don't know what the weather's going to be like, it strikes me
Yeah.
that probably, well, let me ask you the question. How does that affect you? How do you deal with that?
So you have to be prepared, right? So I've got, different things for the different types of weather. I've got to be prepared to either grab a jacket or a heavy coat. But not only that, with the change in weather, is Oklahoma is really bad for sinuses, right? So you could get a sinus infection, or of course we've got different viruses. It's like the season for that, and so you've got to be a step ahead of that to prepare yourself for the unreliability of weather and the different things that it brings, right? So that's the approach. It's just a intentional thought of, okay, I've got to be ready to battle this. I've got to have my oranges, my vitamin C. I got to take my vitamins because on a moment's notice, Yeah. Oh, and we have tornadoes in Oklahoma too, and we're going into tornado season within a month or two. So that's something else we've got to be. That's a bit unreliable, and we've got to be prepared for that as well.
Because you're making me think that if you dropped somebody from somewhere where they have a very reliable climate, either one way or the other, they kind of know what's going to be happening. If they drop them into
Absolutely.
your environment, it strikes me that they would struggle a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me think of an example. A friend of mine who was from a tropical climate. It's like, well, I think you need to put a coat on today. It's going to be freezing cold. They look out and say, no, the sun's shining. It's going to be just fine. I'm like, oh, this is Oklahoma. Just because the sun is shining doesn't mean it can't be 12 degrees outside. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's
My,
an
my
example of
example of unreliability is really quite different. And I'm not sure why this example popped into my mind, but it was an interview for a job. And I knew that I was shortlisted. And so, hopeful that you're going to be selected for this job. Turned up for the interview, and the guy made me wait for 1 hour.
wow.
And I just remember wanting the job. I got the job. I took the job. But when I look back, that should have told me that I shouldn't have taken the job
Oh, wow.
because the guy was an unreliable boss. Um,
Wow.
so part of my original career was commercial hospitality management. So this was as an operations manager in a large establishment in London. So it had restaurants and bars and then private function rooms. And it was losing £1 million a year when I joined. And so I said to the guy, what I'd like to do in addition to the salary is negotiate a bonus based on how much we can reduce the loss. And so he said, yeah, that's fine. So we shook hands on a gentleman's agreement, didn't define the percentage.
Oh, wow.
In year one, I
I feel like
reduced.
I know where this is going, but
Yeah,
but
you
continue.
can tell. So end of year one, loss reduced by £1 million.
Wow.
And so in my performance review, I said to him, so can we talk about the bonus? And he said, well, even if it was only 1%, that would be far too much for me to get approved. So can't give you anything.
Nice.
So that,
I'm sorry, Alan. I'm sorry you had to go through that, man.
that's very kind of you. But do you know what? It doesn't. I suppose it must have affected me for it to be in my mind. But actually, I remember rationalizing it by saying nobody could take the achievement away. That will be with me for the rest of my life. And okay, some money didn't come, but so what, really? And so just thinking about those two examples, your example of unreliability means that you're just adaptable and ready and prepared. My example of unreliability meant that I guess I found a way just to deal with it, which is not that dissimilar, I suppose. You find a way to deal with the unreliability. So maybe they're not so different after all those two examples.
I think they're related. I think they're related, in the sense that it makes me want to ask, like, so what, going forward, when you think of unreliability, how would those red flags impact your decision making going forward? If you were in the same situation again,
Yeah, so
because
I think it's a great question because in the last, I mean, this was many, many years ago, but in the last probably not more than 5 years, I've learnt to trust my intuition a lot more than I did before. So I've recently done a profiling exercise, and what came through was that I tend to go vision first, but then closely followed by logic, which is an unusual pairing, apparently. Um, and I used to defer to the rational because if I
Yeah.
need an explanation, right? But now I've kind of come to the conclusion that there are just some things you can't understand. And so go with what you feel is right. And oftentimes it is right, even though you don't know why. Um,
Yeah.
how are you in that space? I mean, with a music background, that kind of implies all of the creativity and intuition piece. So how
Yeah.
do you balance that left versus right?
Well, it's so I think that life is filled with moments, right? Little bitty moments of that are distinct. Moments of happiness, moments of affirmation, confirmation, moments of feeling like this is exactly what I want to do, and moments of doubt, right? Moments of like, resistance. And so in a situation like that, I would kind of probably rationalize it the same way that you did in saying that the value wasn't in the money. The value was in what you're able to produce and how you're able to perform and that skill set, which is something that nobody will be able to take away from you. You know what I mean? And so that's a win. That's a huge win. That's a big win. And so I think life is like that, like looking at a situation and say, hey, what out of this can I benefit from? If the value isn't money, then and this is a perfect musical example because I know musicians who play music for a living, and sometimes they play for free, sometimes they get $2,500 a night. You know what I mean? Just as a musician, setting in and playing an instrument. So and then those same guys that go on tour and make all this money will come home and do a jam session for free, right?
Yeah.
Because the value isn't in the money, the value is really in the experience and connecting with friends and having creating those moments with music. So
Yeah, and I was having a similar conversation to this not so long ago, actually, and I found myself asking the question around, take a boy band, globally renowned, selling millions of albums all over the world, and then take a cult band with a much smaller following,
yeah,
and ask the question, who's more valuable? Who's more worthy? And it's like, well, if you only use the measure of money, it can take you to a very bad place because, in my opinion, some of the time that music is really not so great.
yeah, yeah. That's another great example. I can think of times where not even just me, other musicians who like some of their favorite shows or favorite moments with music. It may be a moment that was filled with the stadium full, and it may just be a moment with in a rehearsal that they just like that man, it was just everything was like perfect. It was right. We were so in sync. I mean, it was just incredible, right? And so those moments can happen. It can happen in a studio on an album. Musicians are recording. And so it's I mean, I'm an advocate for human experience, and the capacity for human experience is so vast. These moments goes back to these moments that we have. Man, these are the best moments of our lives, even sometimes, right? Often when people are reflecting, their whole life, all these years, there are distinct moments that stick out, right? So
Oh, I've got one for you, Jeff, and I hope you're going to enjoy this one because so I mentioned hospitality earlier. So my job, different job, it was looking after all of the restaurants and bars in a five-star hotel in London. And so my job at lunchtime basically was wander around the place to see if everything was going okay. And I came down, there was a spiral staircase into the lobby and reception area, and I just heard Superstition being played on the piano.
yeah,
And so we had a piano in the cocktail bar, which was before you went into the fine dining restaurant. So I heard this and I thought, well, that's strange because the pianist played at night, but not during the day. So what's going on?
Yeah.
And I turned the corner in the cocktail bar, and there is Stevie Wonder
Oh yeah.
playing
Love it.
song. And the reason why was because there was, sometimes there are charities with terminally ill children and making their
Yeah.
dreams come true. It was one of those things. And I didn't know what was happening until I kind of jolted out of it and looked at my watch, and it was nearly an hour after I just wandered into this room. And I was thinking, oh God, I better go around and see if everything's okay. But that was just an incredible moment.
So he was playing randomly. It wasn't booked, or it wasn't an
It,
event, or it was the children's event.
it was arranged, but I didn't know about
Okay,
it and probably should have
got it.
known about it. But it was just one of those. I don't know what happened to the time. It was almost like, on films, you see somebody going like that and then going like that again. I don't
Absolutely.
remember. I don't remember anything of that time. It was just a bit weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone way off track here, but let's.
Sorry.
No. It's not. It's that's the beauty of this. And actually, another part of this Values Jam card game is that you can invent your own question. So let me invite you to ask your own question about reliability. So beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
So, what has shifted in the way that you view reliability? What has changed for you?
Okay, so I used to be um, madly passionate about the value of reliability and considered it to be one of my strengths. So people could really depend on me. Um, And not to say that it's changed so much, but I think it got to the stage where me being reliable became more important than the impact on other people around. So it might be that, let's take an example of, we've agreed as a group to meet in a certain place at a certain time. And if I'm with a couple of other people, no matter what's happening, hell or high water, as far as I'm concerned, I've got to be there. But I
Yeah.
realized that, well, what if you're putting them through dreadful pain
Yeah.
in order to achieve that? And so I think I attach less importance to my personal reliability and really look at the overall impact on other people at the same time rather than
Yeah.
be one dimensional about it. What about you?
Um, I mean, I think that there are instances like reliability. It's almost like trust, right? Once that's damaged, or like if you get deemed unreliable, then that you're damned, right? But I kind of agree with you. Even me, like now, I don't like being late for things,
Yeah.
but late can happen, right? Late can happen. It does happen, but it's still not a good feeling. And so I've given myself a little more grace and people a little more grace on that, because the thing again, back to value. If like let's say it's a meeting, and we're late for the meeting, or someone's late for the meeting, but the meeting is super impactful and helpful and does exactly what it's supposed to do. The value is there. Then yeah, then that helps. But with the reliability and trust, is also attached to anxiety, right? It could help, like, if we're supposed to meet, or, and you're supposed to pick me up from the airport, and you're unreliable. And now when you pick me up, I've got a bad attitude, and you know what I mean? So I think it's just finding that balance, honestly, giving a little bit of grace on the reliability. But, sticking to it, to a degree.
Yeah, and I think that that last bit about a bit of grace, I think, is a great way to describe it, because I think it's kind of dangerous for me when you start to make those exceptions and allow it, then it's very easy to, oh, well, this guy was late 5 minutes the first time, and so then it just continues. And that's a slippery slope. So it's about having standards, but not obsessively, so that you can be graceful when it's needed. I think that's a brilliant word that you've used there. There's a guy that I must have spoken to him about this topic more than a year ago. But he described to me, he has this way of dealing with things when uh, you're expecting things to be reliable, but they're not. And he said, so for instance, imagine that I've got an appointment across town and I'm going to travel by bus, and I'm waiting for the bus to arrive, and it's on the timetable to be at this time, and it doesn't arrive.
Yeah.
And he said, so the way I deal with that is I say to myself, so that's the way it is. And
I
then,
mean, but absolutely,
yeah, and then
it
he
will
could
be out of
just,
your control.
that's the point. And he said, I just then look at the other options that I've got, make a choice, get to where I've got to get, and I'll get there when I get there.
Yeah.
And I contrasted that because I told him this story. I remember going to work very early one morning. It was kind of between 6:30 and 7 on the London Underground. And I don't know if you know, but on they have LED displays, and it says next train, however many minutes, and then train
Yeah.
and train 3. And this guy came round the corner onto the platform, and he looked at the sign, and it said next train 2 minutes, and he just kind of almost blew up. He's like, oh, forget that train, it never
Yeah.
really upset because he had to wait for 2 minutes.
God. Yeah. I mean, it can really influence. I mean, especially when we're super dependent on that thing that we have no control over.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like, reliability is like when I flip the light switch, I'm expecting it to bring the lights on, right? I need it to be reliable. If I'm driving a car, I need the steering wheel to be reliable. And so I guess there is some wiggle room and grace. And then of course in obvious instances there just isn't. Like, we need it to do what it's supposed to do, right?
What you
Medicine is another example. We would really appreciate reliability, right?
Absolutely. So in some situations, it's actually more important than others. But maybe we don't differentiate so easily, actually, because I'm just thinking about the difference between the known and the unknown. So if you think about the reliability being the known, and then when things you're not sure what's going to happen. Um, but I enjoy putting myself in a situation where I'm really not sure what's going to happen. So, for instance, I used to enjoy being on a surfboard, and you just don't know when the next good wave's going to come.
Yeah.
But there's something fantastic about realizing how small and inconsequential you are, and and you if you catch this wave, you don't know whether you're going to ride it for very long before you fall off or not. But then if you fall off, it's just like, well, just go and get another one.
Yeah.
Rather than this thing about, oh, it's got to come.
It's quite humbling, right?
Yeah. And so there's something about music here as well, actually, because, and I enjoy watching great sports people as well. And it does seem that whether it's a fantastic musician, I suppose a high performer in anything, it seems that they have the ability to be beyond overtly striving to be that good. It's kind of, they're in the zone and they're just doing what they do, and they're somehow at this amazing high level.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So even with music, so there is like, so, and I did a study on professional musicians for that very reason, because professional musicians as opposed to, you know, amateur musicians. Professional musicians have reached an area of playing, a competency of playing music where it's like second nature, right? So professional guitarists can really play more freely and really let go and not force things as much, right? And so it's really that embracing and becoming one space that is like, you know, and there are studies on optimal performance and peak performance for, you know, professional athletes and musicians and things like that. And that's one of the common threads is that, you know, you reach this level of fluency in a given gift or talent or, you know, expertise, you know, and you're in that zone. And then that's really where the magic, you know, where the magic happens. That's really, musicians will describe that space as like, man, this is what I live for. This is the moment, you know. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, that zone is also a desired place for, especially for musicians. It's super desired. But I would imagine it's the same for, you know, anyone who is like, you know, I want to say like absolute or, you know, unmoved in their calling, you know, so to speak, of what it is that they're, you know, here to do. What
And
is it, their real gift? Yeah.
is there another piece here as well where, so I'm thinking that in the world of music, for instance, often you use the term about the, you know, the magic happens. It's when something happens that you weren't expecting. So it's when, you know, the guitar solo comes in,
Yeah.
or somebody goes off and does something a bit different, and
Yeah.
you're like, wow, but they have to have been good enough to do the reliable bit. And then on
Yeah.
top of that comes this extra stuff.
Yeah, you just you have to be good enough to get yourself to that moment where you can wait. So I think really the joy and the rush is in that anticipation that something might happen, the wave, it might happen today, you know, maybe not, but it's still about being ready and available in that moment. And it's taken me years as a musician, it's taken me years to get to this moment where something cool might happen. I may experience something and go to a new place or high in this performance that I've never been. And I would say that it's probably a similar experience with surfing, especially, you know, in the sense that the environment that is so unpredictable, right? You know, and but it's unpredictably good because that's where you want to be, right? So I think there's some, yeah, similarity there.
That difference between the known and the unknown fascinates me because it seems that we are encouraged and educated to kind of operate in the known space. You know, it's like even with a goal or a target, it's like I want to achieve this. And even if I'm short of my target at the moment, I know what the gap is. And so therefore I'm going to, you know, do these things to close the gap. But it's like, well, what percentage of is is the known? And it's such a, I think it's a tiny percentage. And so why are we not more willing, a bit like you today, you know, you've agreed to come on this and
Yeah.
jump into the unknown rather than say, well, hey, Alan, I'd like you to tell me the structure of the conversation and how long it's going to be and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That, I mean, unknown and unknown. The thing is, for me, it goes back to being, you know, humble, right? Like known and unknown, known and unknown. How much is known really when you really think about it, right? How much is really known? You know, I feel like there's so much more that it, you know, is unknown, whether it's knowledge or science or lived experience, music, reliable and like what's you know I love that. It's super fascinating, honestly, that whole concept.
Yeah. So let's bring this to a close. I'm conscious of time. So for our last question, let's play with this. So what are you encouraged to do differently about reliability as a result of our conversation?
As a result of this conversation, as much as I can, with everything in my power, I would like to be as reliable as, as much as I am able to control. Uh, I feel like, even just this conversation, there is some room and grace that I think we are afforded, right? Opportunities and conveniences affords us that grace. But to as much to our power as we can, we should strive to be reliable. Um, yeah, I think reliability is cool.
Okay. And so can I ask you to think about what your first step towards that kind of general direction could be? Is there something that's going to happen in the near term that you can do in a situation that is going to help you towards what you've just described?
Um, yeah, I would say prepare, do the homework beforehand, as much as possible. Just kind of like, again, with the image of the weather in Oklahoma, thinking that through. So maybe giving some forethought, of things that, playing with situations of things that might go wrong. And so I think that as an exercise, as in a ritual, will be a great way of, um, you know, supporting the habit of reliability and increasing reliability. I believe that.
I love the way this is ending up, Jeff, because you're going for reliability. I'm going to go for something on the other side because
Nice.
in a couple of weeks' time, in the south of England, there is a scallop festival in a town in the south of England. So then they're near the seaside and they celebrate scallops for that week. And I guess, I don't know whether it's any other reason, but there's also jazz and blues music during that week. So we're going to stay down there on the Friday and Saturday night. And I became aware that there's a jazz singer playing on the Saturday. And I was like, shall we book? I wonder if he's going to be any good and all of this sort of
Yeah.
thing. And so after this conversation, I'm just going to book it.
Oh, love it. I love it. As long as and the thing that was the decision for you was if it's the singer, is that correct?
Say that
Just
again.
that specific, was it the decision is based on if that specific singer is going to sing or not?
Well, I know who it is, and I looked up a recording on YouTube, and it was okay.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but it's like I'm going to give the guy some grace, and I'm just going to
Yeah,
book tickets. There you go.
absolutely. And here's another thing to consider. So this is something that I've learned as a result of being a musician and studying musicians. I am more sensitive to artists now who are expressing themselves, right? I'm more open and less critical when someone is. And so I'm really just opening myself up to the experience. And I would just say to you, there definitely is a music festival and there's availability in the hotel. Book it, man. Book it.
Well, that's a brilliant note to end on. So, Jeff, thank you so much for coming along for this Values Jam. It's been just brilliant.
Alan, thank you so much. I really appreciate you reaching out. This has been great. Love to do it again sometime.
All right. Cheers, Jeff.
All right, peace.